The Power Query solution is going to start out with the same table I got from copy pasting from the website, and I'll simply load that into Power Query from a table. Here I can see how, just as before, I need to fill up these three columns, but unlike in Excel, I don't have to only select the nulls because it'll override any cell with value. Power Query doesn't work like that. So when BL Fujoshi fills up, it will only replace nulls, which means I can simply select these three columns and fill up. Unfortunately, I have both the type and description in the same cell, which means that I actually only need to keep this row and this row and this row. Any row where there's data in column 4 or column 5, I need to keep, which means I simply remove nulls and I'm left with the 23 collabs that exist. And at that point, it's simply a matter of updating the name for the columns. The downside of this method is, of course, that this comes from an actual source inside the workbook, which means I'll have to update this table anytime new collabs are added. The other option, which is far smarter, is to load the whole table from the web page, which you can actually do, which means I'm not going to be using this query. I simply wanted to show how to do it if you had to work with the table as I did in Excel solution. I can simply say I want a new source, which is from web, where I want to grab the data from the wiki. And when you connect for the first time, it can take a while, and then you will see the options here. So I'll be back when that's ready. Now that the page has loaded, I can see all of the items within the page, which is then the entire page, the HTML page, but I don't care about that. I care about the list of collabs. This is conveniently formatted like a table, and when I then load it, it will actually be a proper table. And that doesn't matter, but I have all of my collabs, headers, and I have my data type, and I have everything. And you can see here how it functions. It uses the web.page function to grab the contents from this page, and then it simply says grab in the first row, where I could also say instead I want to grab the one row where the list of collabs here is, well, where the column caption is equal to list of collabs, but it doesn't really matter here as long as it doesn't change. Because this table is now linked to the web page, anytime I press update, it will grab the new information from the page, meaning I don't have to do anything when there's new data added. And this is the table I'll be referencing. Actually, that should be all collabs. There's one more query I need to load before I start actually manipulating stuff, which is simply to go into excel.current workbook and say I already have one table called tbl_unlock, which is found on the collab list page, where I've simply typed in the name of all the collabs I've already unlocked, which I need in order to do my exclusions and to say what collabs am I missing. There are two tables I want to load into this page called queries, which I'll be using to do my lookups in. And that is this table, but actually I want to duplicate the rows because I want to have the one column as my lookup, because that will be easier for the index match function. So I will create that by duplicate. Actually, no, I don't want to duplicate it. I want to reference it because I only want to do this once. And the way I'll do this is by having this is my first step. Then I'm creating a new step where I change the names here of weapon 2 to be weapon 1 and weapon 1 to be weapon 2. But I can't directly do this since I already have a column by that name. But you don't have to do the renaming in 2 steps. You simply need to change the second column into some other name, because now I change weapon 2 to be called weapon C, and now I can change weapon 1 to be weapon 2, which means I can change this to be weapon 1. So it's a bit of a workaround as a temporary solution, but then you get this step here that's actually proper. That was actually all I needed to do, because now I can append the two tables together. Well, I should rename this to be more descriptive. Then I need to append, and I'll say I append itself to itself. But I don't want to just duplicate the rows. I want to grab the source step, and I want to grab the swap weapon columns. And I don't have to change the order here where I reorder, because it looks, Power Query doesn't care about the position of the columns. It only cares about the name. And because source comes first, it uses the order of the columns from here. And that was my first. Then I want to grab a list of all the names of the weapons, because again, if I used this table, I might not get all the weapons. And here I have duplicates. But because I've already swapped weapon 1 and 2 around, which means I have all of the weapons inside this one column, because a weapon like whammy water could only be found in weapon 2, but now that I've swapped the two columns around, I have every weapon inside weapon 1, which means I can then reference this one to get all of my weapons. Well, all weapon names. So I only want the column, and then I can simply remove duplicates, and that will give me all the 16 weapons. And I want those in ascending order. Next, I want a table that takes the names from my unlocked collabs and adds the corresponding information from all of the collabs, which means I want to do a simple join, which is called a merge from unlocks into the all collabs table. And this simply gives us the 7 original columns, and I don't have to worry about misspellings, at least not right now. When you enter the data into the unlocked collabs, you could have misspellings, but then you're going to get problems. I never want that, and I don't want collabs because I already have that. And here I can choose whether I want to duplicate this table as before, so that I can simply look at the weapon 1 column, and I'm not going to do that because I don't think I'll need that. I simply want to print this in case you want the information, so that you only have to type in the name of the unlocked collab in one table and then you get the related information. Which means this is already done, and then I want the inverse of this, so I want all of the collabs minus those I've unlocked. And that is also fairly straightforward. I'm simply changing whether I'm doing the lookup from unlocks into all collabs, and now I'm doing all collabs into unlocks. But since I want to exclude those rows from unlocks, I don't do a normal left join, I do an exclusive join. So all collabs on unlocks, to say I want to exclude those collabs that I find here. So not left outer, but left empty. And this will then return all those rows where this table, that is the related table, has no information. And all that's left to do is I want to have ascending. And I actually also want that here. Finally, I want to have my grouping of the weapons where I still need a collab, which is this query that I can then reference. And actually here I messed up because I was being a bit too hasty. I don't want all the collabs doubled. I want the remaining collabs, which means I also need to do the doubling and say I now want the remaining collabs. And then I'll do the doubling, because I of course only want to know which weapons I still need to use to get the unlocks, which is the trick as before. And now it's looking right. And here I'm saying that when I have the same count, I want to sort the weapon 1 in ascending order. Later I'll add 2 more queries in order to show how you can do the drop down menu using pure Power Query, and I'll say why I don't think that's a good idea. But now I just need to close and load, and I'll say everything is a connection because I don't want to print everything right now. I want to do it in the proper order. I want all my weapon names to be loaded inside of a cell so that I can refer to it, because when I want to create this drop down menu, I need to have the named range. And right now, let's say I wanted all collabs doubled, I don't have access to that. I only have access to all weapon names because it's physically loaded. If I go into name manager, I can also see that I have that table, all weapon names. And to show this is actually junk, ignore that. This is the table you'd need to add another collab to. And right now there's no error handling, there's no data validation, which you could add. And actually I'm going to add that right after I load in all the collabs. And I specifically want the doubled version because I want to be able to find all of the weapons in one column and not having to look up in both weapon 1 and 2. And it's being a bit annoying, I think, because this is coming from the web, which is exactly what I did before in the pure Excel solution. I want to drop down here, which is based on the data validation, to say I want the list, which is all the weapons. Actually, no, it is all the collabs. And here I have that problem where I have the duplicates, which you'll now see here. I have duplicates, which is not so nice. For the same reason as I added the query here with all the weapon names, I'm going to do the exact same thing. So I'll be going back in and saying that I want that to be the all collabs version, because this doesn't have any duplications. And I'm simply using this to get a list for my data validation. And again, this table's only use is to be used as data validation. Now I can go back here and say that I want to grab the data validation not for this, but for this column. And I can then go back in here where you have to add in the unlock collab. I can now also add data validation here and also list, which should be all of the collabs. So when you try to add it here, you have to pick an option that's inside here. But you still need to add that to the bottom of the table so that the table automatically expands. If I just add it here, it won't do it. And also you can add duplicates here, which actually I guess I should take that into account. That for the unlock collabs, I shouldn't be allowed to have any duplicates. I simply want to remove duplicates. So now you are allowed to add duplicates even though it does nothing. Now do the exact same thing as in the pure Excel solution, which was to do a match and doing it once in one cell first, because I'll be referring to this value 4 times. I want to find that value within all of my collabs double, which is that one, and I want an explicit match, so an exact match. And it's not a problem that I can find the value twice, because match will find the first one. And I'm not worried about having weapon 1 and 2 swapped around, so it's not a problem. And of course you can't find anything because I haven't selected anything. And this is again nothing more than a standard index. The array is then my weapon 1, and I want to find the value inside that cell, and I can anchor that. Don't want that because it's ugly to look at, and then drag that, which will automatically update just as we're used to. And before I show how to do this with pure Power Query, I want to also do it for weapon to look up, because it follows the same principle, which is to do the data validation with a list. And where's my list? Well, that is my weapons to look up after I've excluded duplicates. If I had access to the unique function, I could do this from here and simply say I want to grab only the unique values from collab and only the unique values from weapon 1. Then I wouldn't need these 2 queries or the 2 tables. But I don't have access to that. And again, weapons can have either 2 or 3 collabs. I'm selecting whammy water because I know it only has 2. And then I'll solve the problem by using conditional formatting to hide this 3rd row. And grabbing this is easy. The first value, since this is, I don't have to start the lookup after this position. In this case, I have this column, which will act the same way as this cell. So I first find the row number and then I reference that in these 4 columns. Which means I only have to do match in one position, which is I want to find that cell inside of my queries. And because I want to do the trick where I start my search in an offset position, so I skip the first time I find that weapon, I don't want to do this because then I can't do what I want to do. Instead, I want to refer to this cell. Yeah, I want to do E1 because then I can do my indirect without having to do any kind of offset. So now I will return the row number and not the row number inside my table. That is the index position. And I'll just say, what is the bottom? That is 51, but I want to have some room in case more weapons get added. And I want to have an exact match. It would help if I said it should be column E80. I know there'll always be a second collab for a given weapon, but I'm not sure if there'll be a third. Here I need to again use the match function, but instead of starting at E1, I want to shift my search down, but I'm still trying to find this value, but now my lookup array has been shifted down, which I'll use indirect in order to convert a text string into a reference. And then I need quotation marks around the name of the sheet that I'm looking into. And that is then an exclamation mark, an E column. And my starting row is then 1 plus this value. And I'm not anchoring that, so I can shift it down, which means I should anchor this. Which means that will then be B41 is my starting position. And that's annoying when you hold down shift and space. And I want to end at E80. Here it's important to remember to have the colon. And that is my whole text. which will then be, I want to go into the queries sheet in row E41 and go down to E80. And then I want to add the previous value to it, because if I then find the second collab in row 41, well then this will return 1, because it's the first row inside this range. So I simply have to add the previous value. Here I got a bit too fast and I said I should add 40 to my reference, but I don't want to do that. I want to say I want an exact match. Not that this is important right here, but I want to be thorough, because it will matter in the third row where I might not be able to find a value. And then I don't want it to try to do an approximate match. Here the error came because I added my parentheses too late, because the match should return a value. Because this will then return 10, which means that it's in row 50, which I then get by adding 40 to it. Which we can find by saying that this should be row 40, the first instance, which is frozen sea, which has whammy water, and then it should be row 50, which has snowflower sake or sake. And this time I can copy this down and see that it gets a bit mad, because it can't actually find it. But if I then switch this to spider cooking, which does have a collab, everything is fine. Which means that since this gives an NA error, I want to specifically say if NA, then do nothing. And I don't actually have to do this, I guess, once I check if it's a number or not. Which is exactly what I want to do, because my conditional formatting will then be based on whether this column returns true or not, which it does not for that row. And I can already apply my conditional formatting because I have the column that I want to base it on. And I don't need to apply it to any other row, because I know all collabs have, well, all weapons have 1 or 2 collabs they can create. I'll go back to conditional formatting based on a rule or based on a formula, which is whether the value in C15 in this case is equal to false. And I don't remember if I have to write it like that, but I will find out real soon. I do. Okay. So that's nice to know that you can write false, or you can write false with open and close parentheses. Now I've already hidden that, so I don't have to worry about it. Actually, I do have to worry about it. No, source. That was an unfortunate accident that I randomly picked the single other weapon that only has 2 collabs. That's because I forgot to anchor my rule here, that it should refer to, it should be anchored on the C column, and I could anchor it on 15, but I don't want to, because if I wanted to copy it down, I could now. For every single cell inside row 15, it will then look in C15 whether that's equal to false. And here it's more of the same, that I have to do the indirect function, which will grab the exact value from this page. I can't do an index because I'm using a specific row number, which means I simply need indirect. And I know that this is in, that should be in column D to get the collab. And because the name of my sheet is in one word without spaces, I don't need the apostrophe at the start and end. I can simply do, that was D, and then I want to add the row, which I find here. And I actually needed to anchor that on, I want to anchor it on the B column, but not on the row, because now I can copy it down and copy it to the side. I could not copy that to the side, because I need to change that to, that should be F, and that should be G and H, because now I'm not referring to the tables or the columns in the table, which means the function would jump to the right when I copy the function to the right. And now I can copy those down. So this is all fine, and it works when I pick, then the conditional formatting wasn't copied properly, because apparently I only selected C, but I want that to extend to G. And now it works, because I don't care that there are reference errors, except that I don't want the triangle. And then I wanted to see all of my unlocked collabs with the information. And I already have that thanks to Power Query, which was unlocked all info. Now it's simply a matter of loading that to 21. And now it kind of screws up my formatting, my column sizes, but you can change that by going into properties. Yeah, which I think is a bit hidden here. But you have to go in here and say adjust column width. I'm turning that off because I don't want that. But I'll probably have to adjust that anyway once I add the other tables. And again, because this is grabbing information from the internet instead of this table, it takes a bit longer, a lot longer. Actually, an amount of time I'm not happy with. Because I want to leave some room to have all of the collabs, I would need 23 rows here. So I don't want to put in my next table here, because then it will get overwritten and PowerQuery will not allow that. Which means I need to go down a good bit to have room. And here is also simply saying that this query, which is a connection, should instead be loaded into my sheet. And actually I should change that with the properties too. And again, this simply updates on its own, so I don't have to worry about that. I wanted to know how many unlocked collabs do I have and how many remaining do I have. And I need count A because I'm not dealing with numbers, I'm dealing with text. So find all of the rows inside this column that have text, which is 8, and then the number of the remaining collabs is then this table. And then there's only one table left that I wanted to load, which was the weapons with remaining collab, which is then this one. And that was already everything. And I think this is a lot easier to do than having to do the index matching so many times. And I don't have to deal with the conditional formatting because these tables will automatically expand. What you'd have to do to use this tool is to go here to the unlock collabs and add another, which I've done now. And then you'd have to go and hit update. The only downside I think with this method is that it's based on a web page, which means that it takes a while to load. But once that's done, all of my tables will expand. Once the updating has finished, you can now see that everything has been expanded. Well, all of the tables here. I now have 10 rows, and pay attention to the number 10. And remaining collabs is then 13 because there are 23 in total, which you can also see here. And the weapon with missing collabs table should have updated. Yeah, because there are 13 remaining collabs and I have 26 left, which is then a doubling. And the special thing about the number 10 is that if I go back into the collab list, you'll see that I have 11 collabs, which is because I accidentally added Dragonfire twice, but since I added that extra step to remove duplicates from the unlocked all info, well, actually from this one, then that problem is solved. So you can add as many duplicates as you want to, if you wanted to do that for some reason. It turns out I was a bit too quick and I forgot to show how you can turn the drop-down value into a query itself. And the first trick is you have to make them a named range. So I will say my selected collab and do the same thing for the weapon, because you can load both a named range and a table into PowerQuery, which I'll be showing. I could do this from table here, and it actually means both from table and named range, and that's what the button says in Excel 365, which will then load here. That was what I called it, which you can see here. It goes into Excel current workbook and grabs the one record or one row where the name is equal to, well, my named range, and then it gets the content. And it does these two automatic steps, which I don't want because that's gibberish, so I can delete them. But I do want one single value, which means I can do this drill down, which will give me just the single value as a text. And I can copy paste this because I already know what the other named range is called. That was selected collab. And now I've loaded in the two items from the drop down menu, which I'll then be using as filters for these two queries. These are simply the original query with all of my collabs and the duplicates, where I have both the original weapon in the first column and in the other row I have them swapped around. So I have bounce ball and bounce ball, cutting board and cutting board, which I can use when I want to do my lookup specifically for the weapon. And all I have to do the lookup query is that I want to apply a filter on the collab. And in this case, I don't want to see duplicates because it's the same information, but I'll fix that right after. And the easiest way is to just do a normal filter to get the query I want. And then I can replace this value, which is text, so it's an absolute. And I want to replace it with the value I get from my collab query. And I should actually call that selected. So I follow the same syntax. And now I'm filtering on me commit, and I can simply remove duplicates, or I can say I want the first row. I think personally it makes more sense to remove duplicates, but it doesn't really matter. And then I can, actually I'll do both at the same time because it's just easier. And because I have my duplicate rows, I can simply apply a filter on weapon 1 instead of applying a filter on both columns, which could maybe be a bit more challenging. As before, I apply a normal filter, which I'll then manipulate to have the same value as my query. And here I do want to have both rows because each row will then be equal to exactly one collab. And for whammy water, there are only 2 collabs, which is exactly what I expect. And then I can say close and load 2. And I want to create a connection so I can specify where I want to load them, because I have 2 tables, so I can't specify where I want to load it. Which means the collab needs to be loaded in here, right underneath, and say that's fine. And as before, I want to remove the property that it adjusts column width, because I think that's annoying. And the weapon should also be loaded beneath. And the nice thing with this solution is that with whammy water and sausage, it only gives 2 rows, and the table will automatically update and change the number of rows. And because I've loaded in my query from a spreadsheet, so within the source itself, there's not a lot of downtime when I click update. But the downside of this method is that unless you create a macro to update your query, whenever you change these 2 selections, which you can do, you'll have to manually click on the update button anytime you change these. And I actually messed up this one. That should have been the collabs and not that should have been the weapons. Yeah, I'll now have to manually press the update button or refresh button in order to change them. Yeah, I swapped both of those around. So that's what happens when you rush. And now it's fine. If I want to update both at the same time, I can press the shortcut key Ctrl-Alt-F5 or press the refresh all button. And that is the last thing I had to say. Yep,